Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the Israeli argument for its existence, its actions, and the justifications given for its actions, as explained by the Israeli scholar Ilan Pappé. In 1918, when the Ottoman Empire breathed its last, Palestine was transferred to the British as a part of the mandate provided by the League of Nations. The British stayed there from 1918 to 1948, but during this time it was necessary for the British to decide the future of the Palestinian territory such that the Muslim Arab world does not develop a strong coalition which would later become a threat for the Europeans. The pogroms against the Jews in Eastern Europe had started during the First World War, especially in the Ukraine, and these Jews fled Russia and Eastern Europe to find another home. They looked towards Great Britain and the United States, but the Western Jewish community was apprehensive of these Jews entering their countries in the thousands. The same fervor was experienced in France. It is interesting, as Ilan Pappé notes, that the anti-Semites in France and the Jewish community there were both enthusiastic about returning to the homeland, because the result of this enthusiasm was not the passionate immigration of all the Jews to Palestine. Rather, the rich Jews, like the Rothschilds, never thought of going to Palestine. They did not want to endanger their lives and investment in a new territory, surrounded by the Arabs. Until 1948, almost 100,000 Eastern European Jews were transferred via Cyprus to Palestine. As the British prepared their withdrawal from their former colonies, just like they escaped the Indian subcontinent in 1947, where coincidentally another country in the name of religion was created, i.e., Pakistan. The Zionist leader Ben Gurion was preparing plans to create a de-Arabized, purely Jewish state in the name of Judaism. On the 15th May 1948, Israel got its independence, but the Nakba, which was the forced mass exodus of 750,000 indigenous Palestinians from their homeland, had started under the British surveillance. Pappé has highlighted the fact that all Western politicians, whether they be from France, Germany, or the United States, consider that the Palestinian problem began in 1967. They never mention in their political rhetoric the Nakba of 1948, and there are various reasons for that. Firstly, the documents that demonstrate the true nature of events are hidden by the Israeli authorities in their archives, and luckily enough, Pappé had access to them because he was an Israeli academic who taught at the Haifa University till 2006, when he was forced to resign by the Israeli establishment. Reading through these documents depict the fact that the Israelis were meticulous in planning out the expulsion. They had identified through spies and various surveys all the potential rebels who had taken part in any kind of revolt until 1948 against the Jews, and were waiting for the British to loosen their grip so that they can take revenge. These documents are still hidden from the global public, and only a few of them are available on the website that Pappé has created for the purpose of bringing them to light. Secondly, the suppression of the events of 1948 Nakba allows Israel to present a new narrative in which the Palestinians are equated with the Nazis. From 1967 onwards, after the international community started paying more attention to the Palestinian problem, the Zionist regime had to justify its atrocities to the world. Therefore, they kept 1967 as the starting point of their conflict so that the public minds do not stretch back to the cause of the problem, i.e., the Nakba. In 1948, when the Palestinian issue was submitted to the UN, the Zionists were not happy when Resolution 181, the notorious Resolution number 181, was passed designating Zionism a state called Israel, which was not equivalent to the greater Israel that they actually negotiated for. The Arabs did not even become part of the negotiations, calling them absolutely unacceptable that Palestine would be partitioned into two states. They always stood for one state solution where all religions had coexisted for millennia and will continue to do so. Ben Gurion snatched this opportunity to accept the resolution and let the matter of borders of two states hang in the balance. The Zionist plan in 1948 was simple. They will use force to expel the Arabs from the land designated by the UN resolution first, and then continue doing so. In case someone raises a voice, they would argue that the Arabs are not signatory to the resolution, so they do not know where the actual border could have been. The first military unit under the Israeli establishment was formed by the name of the Haganah. Its task was to barge into the villages and towns and evacuate them. They were ordered to kill anyone who had been involved in the Palestinian resistance movement and evacuate the women and children from their homes immediately. They were ordered to shoot anyone who showed any resistance on the spot, whether it be women, men, elderly, or children. Pappé, in his book The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, has described in detail the events in Palestine from December 1947 to May 1948, the period when the British were still present in Palestine. In it, he described the atrocities that were committed to instill terror and fear into the heart of Palestinians. Pappé's supervisor was the great Albert Hourani at Oxford University. He recounts that when he decided to do research on this period of 1948 Nakba, he knew nothing of what had happened at the time. But since he had access to Israeli archives, Hourani told him to reconsider his topic because it would change his life forever. Pappé persisted, and in the end, when he did take a look at the personal diaries of Ben Gurion and other Zionist leaders of the time, that included details about personal meetings and letters, he was shocked. And throughout his book, he has expressed his disgust and sorrow of being ignorant of the cost of Israeli flourishment, whose foundations are ruins of a once thriving, peaceful community. During the 6 months from December 1947 to May 1948, the Israeli command was not very well organized because it was a new country and the Haganah did not know what the reaction would be of the Palestinians and also the Arab world at large once they execute the plans that were directed to them. From early 20th century, maybe even before that, the Jews had started buying land in Palestine and started settling there in patches. There were sparse Jewish settlements here and there apart from the ultra-Orthodox Jews who had always lived with the Muslims and Christians in major urban areas like Haifa, Acre and Jerusalem, to name a few, and was somewhat skeptical of the Zionist plan. Ben Gurion, in his private meeting with his colleagues, was ruthless in devising a plan that would expel the Arabs from the area designated by the UN resolution. The first step was to evacuate more than 10,000 villages that were close to the Jewish settlements and that came between the roads joining the two settlements. The method followed was straightforward. An Israeli battalion entered a village, usually at odd hours at night, and blew up a few homes while the inhabitants were sleeping inside, and then announced on loudspeakers that everyone has a few hours to evacuate their homes immediately. In case anyone is found after the appointed time, will be killed and forcefully expelled. After this, they rolled down barrels full of oil burning with fire while people tried to flee and shoot randomly to create chaos and terror. When the appointed time was over, then they blew up all the houses, not caring about the invalids and old who could not have moved in the appointed time. Later, when the Israeli soldiers gave testimonies that can be found in Pappé's book, they often said that when they entered the house to take away whatever they wanted, they were surprised to find that the food was still warm on the dishes lying on the table, ready to be eaten. And everywhere there were corpses, crippling bodies, which they shot dead because they had to get done with the job. Ben Gurion did not give any justifications in his private meetings regarding these operations. There were hardly any criticisms in the higher echelon. The enthusiasm was so high that he did not need to convince anyone. But the problem arose when he had to justify these actions to the public and the international community. During the Nakba, there were a few poorly armed men who tried to defend their villages from the Israeli onslaught. These stories were immediately used as a narrative to justify Israeli actions. The Haganah wanted to provoke the Palestinians so that they can react and justify their actions. But as Pappé notes, they were surprised to find no resistance, no fight from the Palestinians, no reaction. They just wanted to live in peace and let live. Absence of provocation disturbed the Israeli soldiers because it did not give them any pretext. Therefore, as soon as there was any small resistance from villagers, they were immediately equated with the intentions of the Holocaust and bloated out of proportion. The Nakba has always been a thorn in the Zionist project. Hence, to silence the public, the Israeli authorities passed the Nakba law in 2010, which prohibited everyone from even mentioning the Nakba in Israel. The main argument given by Israelis had always been the same. The Palestinian resistance movement since 1948 is the second Holocaust. The Israelis consider themselves to be surrounded by their enemies, and just as the Nazis used extermination techniques against them, the Palestinians who had been attacking the Zionists are also following the same ideology. The continuity of the Nazi project in Palestine is the main narrative used by the Israeli government to justify its atrocities. The second argument for the existence of Israel is the religious idea that they were expelled from this land 2000 years ago for killing Jesus. So now they must return there so that the second Messiah will come. And this argument, as Pappé explains, is not a Jewish argument. We must distinguish this argument as a Zionist argument because Zionism stems from evangelical ideology. There are both Christians and Jews who call themselves Zionists. They do not want the Jews to go to Palestine because it is their homeland. They want the Jews to establish their homeland so that the second coming of Jesus can be hastened. And by the way, there is an Islamic version also of the story that says that ultimately Jesus will come and destroy the Jews in Israel. There is a lot more to Nakba than I have said over here. Pappé goes in detail how the Israeli forces went one by one into different villages and village by village destroyed the Palestinian heritage. Furthermore, he discusses the narrative and historiographical strategies that have been used by the Israelis to justify their actions. But he does say at the end that unless the contemporary political leaders start their historical clock of the Palestinian issue from the Nakba in 1948, there can never be any concrete resolution of the Palestinian problem. Because the Palestinians were expelled either to other neighboring countries, especially Jordan across the Jordan River, and with time they were forcefully moved to the south in Gaza. The current events make a lot of sense once the narrative begins from the root cause of the problem. Otherwise, the international community will continue to treat cancer with aspirin. All in all, Palestinian issue has many layers to it and requires a broad-minded approach to be resolved. The Jews, the Christians and the Muslims need to sit together to figure out the theological side of the argument and resolve the religious backlog. The global political leaders need to sit down and find a diplomatic resolution to this political problem, which has been wrongly assumed for a long time to be a military problem. Thank you, everyone.